for further analysis. We're joined from London by Mr. Nicholas Williams, former NATO official, and from Kentucky by Dr. Ihsan Al-Khatib, political science professor. Good afternoon to you both, gentlemen, and welcome to Qnews. Let me here start by asking Mr. Nicholas. The European Commission plans to suspend Israel's participation in Horizon Europe represents the EU's first coordinated practical step against Israel's genocidal practices in Gaza. Why do you think it took so long for the EU countries to consider imposing such a measure from your point of view?
Well, the EU, the European Union, is a complicated organization bound by treaty. Some powers lie still with the member states, and some powers lie with the European Commission. In effect, the European Commission is the civil service of the EU. And what the EU Commission can do in this case is propose to the member states what is necessary, or what they believe that the Commission believes is necessary. The problem is, though, that the Commission is very sensitive to political opinion within the EU, and there is no settled view within member states of what to do in this situation in Gaza, for example. And so
you mean here you mean here a united stance towards the issue? Is this what you mean here?
No, I think there are some countries in the EU which are very favorable to the Israeli interpretation of why it's gone to war and what the situation is, and they would not want to weaken Israel. And so the European Union, in its 27 members, are not agreed. And agreement, consensus, is necessary in order to suspend this participation of Israel in the Horizon program.
Mm-hmm. Professor Ihsan, despite critics undermining the significance of the latest EU proposal, EU officials can't still rally support to pass such decision. Why are major EU countries, such as, for instance, Germany and Italy, reluctant to take further action against Israel?
For a number of reasons. I mean, the politics of the issue. Look at Italy. Italy is a right-wing government. It hasn't been really positive toward Muslims in general. And it's close to the U.S., so that plays a role. The main problem with the EU is that the EU is not the United States of Europe. The U.S. has 50 states, the EU has 27 states, but these states are sovereign countries, members of the EU, and they, especially with foreign policy, they value that independence very, very important to them. There was at one time thinking that they would be like the United States of America, but they're not really United Europe in important ways. They're independent countries, and their decision-making is by consensus, which slows things down and leads to diluting positions that they take. As your guests indicated, they have different politics, they have different priorities. Some of them are closer to the US, some of them are closer to Israel. The Jewish community that they have. So many different factors play a role. But I think in general, there is a movement. The post October 7 situation is not like before it. And even small measures actually are issues of concern for the Israelis because they can lead to something bigger. I think the change is happening, but not fast enough for the Palestinians.
And that's a big point that we have to raise here. But let me go to Mr. Nicholas. And Mr. Nicholas, the UK's recent announcement that it will follow France and recognize Palestinian statehood, and Canada's declaration that it intends to do the same, adds new urgency to a long-standing question. But do you think recognition of Palestinian statehood is enough when it comes to Gaza's endless suffering?
Well, it's not enough, and it's not particularly effective in terms of addressing this humanitarian crisis. Ironically, this statement from the British government is conditional. So it's conditional not on the Palestinians or not on the Palestinian Authority. It's conditional on Israel, which is a strange concept to make a recognition of one state by imposing conditions on a third state. And I think this whole British government statement is confused, but it's also a mission of weakness. It's an admission that it's only got this statement to make.
Mm-hmm. Professor Ihsan, there is no doubt that the recent statements by France, the United Kingdom and Canada are historic. But are any of these leaders considering taking more drastic steps that would really pressure Netanyahu's government?
It doesn't seem like it. The only country in the world that can really pressure Israel is the United States. And the only reason that Israelis have done what they have done is the United States. And they count on the United States influence, because the position of the US that the US and Israel are the same, basically. That if you mess with Israel, it's like messing with the US. That they say that if you arrest Netanyahu, it's like you're arresting Trump. The thinking is if you arrest Netanyahu today, you'll arrest Trump tomorrow, which is a bizarre logic, but that's how the US is approaching issues dealing with Israel. For example, with the International Criminal Court, they're pretending that it's the same, it will apply to the US, and saying that it will declare war basically on economic war, maybe, on a country that holds Israel accountable. And that's the challenge.
Yes. Mr. Nicholas, amid the unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, why is the European Union struggling to reach a unified position on sanctions against Israel?
Well, as I explained before, and as your guest in the US has explained, there is no consensus in the EU.
And that's a big point that you raised before, and I wanted to illustrate more on that. What do you mean by they have no consensus? I mean, why you said that some of the countries are more close to Israel, they have interests, but now we're speaking about an international reputation. We're speaking about the image of the EU as a bloc to the whole world. So what exactly is the situation here?
Well, the situation is that some countries, as I say, not only just favor Israel and have interests in Israel, but they see the Middle East situation through Israeli eyes. And that's a fact of life. They feel that the October the 7th massacre justified the reaction of Israel. They may think Israel is going too far, but they also think that they have no power or influence because the United States is in sole control of Israel. So it's sanctions, they feel, will be an exercise in futility. That's some countries, not all EU countries, but you need all EU countries to impose sanctions as in the name of the bloc.
Now, Professor Ihsan, how do differing historical, economic and political ties with Israel influence EU member states' stance?
They have actually gotten closer with Israel over the years, and Israel values this relationship with the EU. But at the same time, Israel realizes that EU is an economic giant, but it's not a military giant, and the EU needs the US. The EU needs US. All kinds of problems. It's a disappointment because they're an economic giant. And they're a cultural giant, but they are a military giant. They're not a military giant by far. So whenever there is a crisis, they look to the U.S.
So we're not speaking.
There was war.
So we're not speaking now about the EU-Israel economic and trade relations and cooperation. We're speaking here about the EU and the United States.
And the
So
EU
it's
as an
the whole
entity,
point
yes.
is with the United States. This is what you're saying here.
Yeah, it's dependent on the US. Any crisis, the US leadership, they count on the US military umbrella. They need the US, and the US makes it clear that their position as to Israel is important in the relationship with the US. And even look at the Canadian-American relationship, which is very important. Trump brought up the issue of recognition of Palestine as the problem for the Canadian-American relationship. So that complicates the issue for the Europeans, that they value the U.S. relationship. And the question for them is it worth risking this relationship with the superpower of the world for the sake of the Palestinians? Even though the EU is founded on respect for international law and human rights, but at the same time, they have Ukraine, for example, and they have Russia close by, and they know that they need the United States.
But this is a big problem we're speaking about. We'll get to that again. Mr. Nicholas, given Joseph Borrell's criticism of the proposal, how significant is the European Commission's proposal to curb Israeli access to EU research funding as a form of pressure? And how might Israel respond to pressure concerning this research funding and trade agreements?
Well, this Horizon program, and the participation of Israel is as benefit to the EU as well as Israel. And Israel, as you know, is a technologically advanced country, and most EU countries value that cooperation, technical and scientific cooperation with Israel. So if it happens, if it's suspended, and I doubt whether the EU will suspend the participation of Israel, then, as your guest from in the US says, it is a small but accumulative pressure on Israel, which demonstrates its isolation or growing isolation from Europe and the growth of opposition to Israeli policies throughout the world, including Europe. But it will be a small, but as I say, an accumulative pressure, indication that Israel has gone too far.
Would that take the European Union, before taking such a step, would that depends on the US accepting the idea?
No, because yes, EU needs the United States, wants to maintain relations with the United States, but it doesn't seek a permission to do this sort of policy from the United States, because in effect it harms the EU more than Israel by cutting off technological and scientific cooperation.
In which way? We'll speak about that.
Because I don't know if you remember the Draghi report last year, which was a sort of autopsy, or at least analysis of European weakness, and he identified the lack of research, investment, capability as one of the fundamental weaknesses of the EU, and some countries in the EU are conscious that cooperation with Israel is of benefit to the EU in this domain.
Mm-hmm. Professor Ihsan, what does the internal EU rift reveal about the balance between human rights concerns, definitely, and the geopolitical alliances in EU decision making?
That's the key question, actually. And for any state, you have the issue of commitment to international law, and then you have their own interests. And that's the challenge. Human rights, there is actually something called the responsibility to protect, and they should actually be now intervening on behalf of the Palestinians. But unfortunately, politics gets into it, national interest gets into it, and realism is that the states are looking for their self-interest and for more influence in the world, and not driven by ideals and human rights. It's a fact.
Interesting what you're
Yeah.
speaking about, sir, because what we're speaking about here is that about countries who have always spoken high of the human rights values and principles that should go ahead of any kind of interests, or those are the countries who have always put that in the forefront of their actions. So now the whole situation has changed.
And it's a scandal, actually. Some cynics have always said that, look, there's nothing really called international law and human rights. It's just a tool to intervene, and for big states to intervene in the business of small states. It's used as a weapon. So there is a problem with that country. We'll pull the file for human rights and say, oh, we have a human rights issue and we will push this. And then when this powerful country gets what it wants, then they put that file aside and pretend it doesn't exist. So, for example, look at the Iranian case. Did Biden talk about human rights in Iran when he's trying to get a nuclear deal? Did Trump talk about human rights in Iran? But there is always the file, the human rights file, and then it will be resurrected as needed. That doesn't mean
Will
that the
be
states
resurrected
actually
when needed, indeed.
as needed, yes. But it doesn't mean that some people don't believe it. Actually, some people do believe in human rights, but politics and national interest would always trump ideals.
Right. Mr. Nicholas, Borrell described the EU's proposed measure as a bad joke. What stronger measures are needed to confront Israel's genocidal policy in Gaza if they are able to take such steps?
Well, if they're able to take such steps, then obviously they would impose a total embargo on Israel until it ceases its actions in Gaza and in the West Bank. But as I said, it's impossible to get the EU to agree such an embargo and cutting off relations, because many countries in the EU agree with that Israel has reacted to the terrorist actions of Hamas in a rational way, not a reasonable way, but the attack from Hamas merited an attempt to suppress the source of the attack.
Well, you're speaking about an attack that has not been met with proportional acts. We're speaking about the death of nearly now 60,000 people, most of them children and women. We're speaking about the blockage of aid and all humanitarian issues, food, water, the destruction of all health system. We're not speaking about a proportional action at all.
Yes, I'm an observer and an analyst. I'm not justifying the position of those countries. But as I said, this whole area of accusations of genocide, deliberate starvation, is disputed among certain countries. And if this humanitarian crisis, they argue, is such as to cause unprecedented suffering, why does not Hamas make some sort of gesture for peace and withdraw from the territory, and then peace could happen, if that's what the objective is, to eliminate the humanitarian crisis. That's what they argue.
Mm-hmm. Professor Ihsan, Slovenia has gone further, announcing a full ban on arms exports to Israel, the first such move by an EU nation. Could the lack of a unified EU stance push more member states to act independently, further fragmenting European foreign policy?
Yes, I mean, EU foreign policy has always been an issue, has always been a problem, and that's the very nature of the creature called the EU, the fact that they seek consensus, and consensus delays decision-making and then dilutes the decision they reach. So that's the nature of things. It's like the United Nations in a way, with the Security Council. That's a institutional structure problem. I agree with you that the response, whatever response we see, is not on the same level of the crisis. I mean, it's a disaster, and then you have a response from the world, all countries in the West, that's very limited, very, very shy. I mean, Canadians want to recognize Palestine. There is a genocide. There is a genocide. The International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Israeli.
But here, Mr. Nicholas said, that the issue is a two-side issue, which is at one side.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the rationalization. I mean, it's an obvious disaster. I mean, it's obvious there is a genocide. People are starving. You have images of people that look like images of the Holocaust survivors. And Israel has manufactured a disaster whose solution is the most simple solution on the planet. You have a country that's willing to cooperate and is cooperating, Egypt. You have massive amount of aid waiting at the border. And then you have the Israelis at gunpoint preventing food from entering and shooting people seeking food. I mean, this is not a complicated issue. We're all on the one side and the other side. Doesn't matter what Hamas did or didn't do. I used to work for a nonprofit organization, a humanitarian. The food goes to these people in need, non-combatants. It's not even about civilians, it's about non-combatants. What's happening is a scandal. I mean, it really undermines faith in humanity of these politicians. I mean, humanity, I think, is doing a good job because all this food is being sent by people. And people care, but these leaders have failed. They've been lecturing, Western leaders have been lecturing less developed countries for all these decades, and all of a sudden...
You mean here that the issue of ceasefire should take a path, but parallel to that path, the mass starvation should stop. This is what you mean here.
I agree with you, guys. I mean, it's not his vision, obviously, but I mean, there is no easier case on the planet. I mean, the World Court said they're occupying West Bank and Gaza. It's an illegal occupation, and they should end it and should actually pay the Palestinians if you go by international law. And then you have International Criminal Justice, ICC, the International Criminal Court, that's established by the Western countries, saying these people are criminals committing a genocide and issuing arrest warrants for them. And the food is plenty rotting at the border, and the Israelis won't let it in. So it doesn't really matter what Hamas did or did not. I mean, Hamas, they are Palestinians. Whether you like them or not, they are part of that society, just like the Likud, and that's just like Smotrich and Gvir, who are horrible human beings, are just part of Israel and part of the political process. It's really a failure.
Right. Let me take briefly a word from Mr. Nicholas here, because we're out of time. Please, if you have any response or comment.
Well, I agree that the situation is scandalous and should be stopped, but it's not an issue of simple humanitarianism. It's a strategic issue which many countries have an interest in, and therefore the concerns, the starvation, the suffering of ordinary people takes a back row, takes a back place to the strategic interest at hand. If it was just a humanitarian issue, it would have been solved. But it's not because of the
And
strategic issues involved.
don't you think, Mr. Nicholas, that this in itself is a scandal?
Of course, it's a scandal.
That strategic interests go before humanitarian issues?
Yes, of course, it's a scandal. Of course, it's a scandal.
Right.
But that's the world in which we live. We can't separate the humanitarian from the politics.
Very clear, Mr. Nicholas. That was Dr. Ihsan Al-Khatib, political science professor, and Mr. Nicholas Williams, former NATO official. We thank you both, gentlemen, for your insights here.